It's a privilege and honor for me to be here this afternoon to help celebrate the life of Daniel Ward Kelleher.
Due to his grandkids, my dad had a paper route at age 12.
Dude and I both shared a love for music.
I could always count on Dude for a physics lesson, a laugh, a hug. I'll miss him dearly, but man, am I glad that I knew him.
So here we are to honor Daniel and his life together in this virtual and very real place of gathering.
That aren't here, like, they also thought she was their grandma. She was everyone's grandma. And I only hope that I can live up to her. Thank you all for being here. I love you so much.
I didn't expect anybody other than Debbie and me to be here.
We thought we were going to be all alone, and we got everybody. Oh, it means so much to us.
Suzanne and I am the Gathering Nuts facilitator for today's event. We are going to get started today by watching a slideshow.
During these days of struggle, we really need to have words of hope. While I and my family stand deeply grieved, we're also thankful for the chance to have had her.
So happy everybody could do this. We were feeling very lonely.
Thank God for technology.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Thank you all from the bottom of my heart for coming here and doing this with us. Took a little convincing mom and dad that this would work. I'm glad they did.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Green Funerals Week. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Duwamish, and Suquamish nations on which we work and live. Our office is located in Queen Anne, and most of our staff lives in the surrounding area. A little bit of housekeeping. I've got all participants on mute to help keep some of that background noise down. I do apologize, I might be muting myself as well. My neighbor has decided to get one of his trees carved into a totem pole today, so the chainsaw goes on and off, so I'll be mindful of that. This presentation is being recorded, and we do have the chat box there for some questions. I think this is going to be, I hope this is a presentation that evokes a lot of questions from you. So a quick overview of People's Memorial. We are the oldest and largest memorial society in the US. We were founded here in Seattle in 1939. So we're currently celebrating 81 years of service. We are the only nonprofit in Washington State providing funeral education and advocacy. We are the state affiliate of the national organization called Funeral Consumers Alliance. Many states do have organizations that are similar to ours. So if you're joining us from out of state, you can check out the Funeral Consumers Alliance website to see if there's a group in your state. Over the 81 years that we've been around, we just hit the 215,000 mark of members who've joined our organization. And we approximate that about 70,000 of those folks are still living with us today. So what we do, we provide free education like the classes you're attending today. You've hopefully been joining us throughout the week. Our classes touch on anything to do with end of life or end of life planning. We also provide lots of resources to help you get your end of life plan together. We advocate at the state level to increase consumer choices within the funeral industry, to increase price transparency when visiting funeral homes and purchasing services from them. And then we also worked to protect cultural rights so that we can practice our traditions and handle bodies in the way that our culture has guided us. So we are a membership group, and if membership is attractive to you, there is a lifetime membership one-time fee of $50 per person, and that gets you access to affordable cremation, burial, and soon to be aquamation and recomposition rates. We've got contracts with just over 20 funeral homes across Washington state, and we screen these funeral homes for you to ensure that they're running ethical businesses. We guarantee you will receive no sales pressure from their staff. We negotiate price discounts for you, so there are no surprises when it comes time to pay the final bill. We also have contracts with cemeteries, and as you saw in that opening video, we do have a new contract with a virtual funeral and memorial service provider, even a pet funeral home. And our members own the Co-op Funeral Home, which is located in Seattle, and we do service King County. And we're excited to share that we're one of the top 5 volume funeral homes in King County. And the Co-op is one of the only not-for-profit business model funeral homes in the nation. So we're very proud of that. So today, to finish up our Green Funerals Week, we are doing a little fact or fiction session, Beverly, Tryk, and myself. There are a few items or products out there that companies claim to be eco-friendly when it comes to death care. And so we're going to kind of look into those and see if they really are doing what they claim to do. And just a quick note, thank you for joining us today. We were originally scheduled to have this on Friday, but we had a little funny business last Thursday, so we had to reschedule. So thanks for being here. So with that, I'd like to bring Beverly on with me. Okay, and I think, Beverly, to run this poll, we're going to start with a poll. I might have to stop screen share, so bear with me just a second. We're doing something new today. Before we get started on the discussion, we'd like you all to participate with us. And so we have a poll. There are 7 questions. So once I launch this poll, you'll see it pop up on your screen, and you can read each statement and choose fact or fiction. And then we will go through each one and talk about each statement. All right, so I'm gonna launch the poll, and I hope you all can see it. Don't worry about the timer, we'll give everyone time. So just click through there and click on fact or fiction.
And no pressure, we won't know what you put on there. It's anonymous. We just want to give you guys a chance to chime in with what you think kind of coming into this, and then maybe you learn something new on the way out. I get the sense, though, based on a few of these familiar faces, we might have some folks that know a little bit about this stuff already. So keep your answers to yourself. Dang, it won't let me answer. I think that yeah, maybe I might have an unfair advantage. Let's see.
Let's see, Bill, I see it won't let you submit. We're gonna look into that and see why. Like I said, this is our first time using the poll, so bear with us here. You know, I'm not quite sure. I'm not seeing any options here, Beverly, are you?
I can only see the summary of the results that are coming in.
Well, Bill, maybe if you're up to it, when we approach each statement, you can type in there fact or fiction if you want to.
Oh, don't put them on the spot.
Yeah, we don't need to put you on the spot, but I'm sorry about that, Bill. I'm not exactly sure why it's not letting you go through.
If you want to jot down your answers though real fast, then you can check your work against our presentation. So
yeah.
Looks like we have almost everybody.
Oh, he's okay, great. So I'm going to end the poll. All right, we'll keep those off to the side and we'll work through them here. So let me get back to sharing my screen. Okay, all righty. So the way we're going to move through this, I'm going to, oh, I was supposed to show you this screen. Here's some pictures of the things that we will be looking into. I am going to be asking Beverly these questions and she's going to be answering for us, kind of like an interview setup. So the first statement, cremated remains can support the growth of a tree. We had 4 folks say that was a fact and 9 folks say that was fiction. Drum roll, please.
Oh, I've got something for this. Hold on.
Oh, I went ahead.
Okay, well, okay, well, if you've joined us on some of the previous sessions, you've heard me talk about this already. We found this gorgeous image from, I believe this company is called Capsula Mundi, and they have these beautiful promotional images for this pod that you can put your remains in. Right now, the model is just an urn to hold your ashes, but they're working on a way to make a pod to hold an entire intact human body. Beautiful idea, beautiful image, but as we learned last week, cremated remains are a super crappy growth medium. They're very alkaline, the pH is very high, just like chalk or Tums or something like that. We also know they're real salty, and that can really impact the ability of, oh, thank you for the company name if you guys want to check into this particular one. As we learned last week, there's a lot of micronutrients that soil needs in order to nurture plant growth. And those simply aren't a feature of ashes. Those are what remains at the end of the burning process. And so it's really just a lot of carbon. It doesn't have any of that organic material because that process is designed to remove all those organic materials. And so we know that it's too salty, too chalky, and also that including that into the soil can actually inhibit the work being done by nutrients already existing in the soil, like nitrogen. So it can actually make the existing soil more of a poor plant environment. So kind of a disappointing realization, but we came up with some really cool alternatives when we talked about this last week. Personally, I am, just like a lot of folks up here in the Pacific Northwest, am just an irredeemable tree hugger. And so it was such a disappointment for me to discover this, and I'm still trying to figure out what's the best way that I can contribute to the nurturing of plant growth in life that I enjoyed so much when I was alive. Some folks had these ideas, maybe we take a sort of a ceremonial amount of ashes to incorporate into a tree planting. Instead of an entire urn worth, maybe we just have a tablespoon or a handful or something like that. There's some really interesting research being done about soil amendments, I think they're called. And so there's this work being done to create a type of soil mixture that'll help sort of correct some of these chemical imbalances and try to help with the soil chemistry to nurture that plant growth a little bit better. So maybe it's a little bit easier to use those ashes in a way that nurtures plant growth. We had one attendee who had a really great idea to maybe be a little bit mindful about the type of plant we're looking at. So we know ashes are very alkaline, so maybe we can find a type of plant that really thrives in that environment, like a hydrangea. So maybe it doesn't work that great for a pine tree, but maybe hydrangeas. So that could be a little bit of a problem-solving process. Once we've identified what the struggle is with using ashes to grow a tree, maybe we can find a way to kind of work with it and problem solve a little bit. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah, so what would that look like, Beverly, if someone were to choose a ceremonial amount? What are some options? How could they do that?
Yeah, so one thing I've seen is that maybe you take a just a literal spoonful, and you combine it into the soil when you plant the tree. I've seen some websites that maybe are a little bit, I'd hate to accuse them of being misrepresentative, but some companies that make it sound like your body is part of a pod that grows into a tree, but what actually happens is you take an entire urn, you bury the urn, and then on top of the urn, you plant a tree. So the ashes aren't interacting with the tree in any way, but they're at the base of the tree. So that could be kind of a cool option as well. So instead of just taking all those loose ashes and mixing them into the soil or putting them in at the base of the plant, maybe there's a way that you can have them ceremonially close by or incorporated in a way that's a little bit more mindful of that soil chemistry.
Okay, great. And we do have a question that came up. Can you talk to us a little bit about the scattering laws? And I would just like to make note, this will be about the laws here in Washington State. We are, each state will have their own laws about scattering ashes.
Yeah, well, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the federal organization that kind of keeps an eye on environmental things, has very, very little to say about this. And I think it's mostly because they kind of defer to the wishes of each individual state. And here in Washington, we have some, I don't think lax is the right word, just really expansive, kind of vague laws. There's not a ton of guidelines here. They really don't like it when you scatter on someone else's property, so maybe be mindful of your neighbors or businesses. But with you have to seek out permission ahead of time from the Forest Service or Fish and Wildlife to scatter on parks or state lands. We prefer that you don't scatter into non-moving water. I think the way they word it in our law here in Washington is you can scatter into navigable waterways. Sometimes, depending on where you are, there's some laws about how close to the shore you can be if you scatter into the ocean. Generally, those environmental protection agencies, either nationally or locally, would require you to let them know what you're up to. But truthfully, those laws are really poorly enforced. They're really not going to know. So just, we're keeping you on the honor system. So maybe just keep in mind, you know, the way that other folks might encounter those remains. And oh, that's a good question. Yeah, just kind of keep in mind the environment and the folks that you might be encountering around. People, I think, are often faced with a little bit of a challenge when a loved one dies and they have really specific wishes for what you can do with ashes, and they might find themselves in an awkward position of being asked to do something that's illegal or maybe just not that feasible. I know that Disneyland finds themselves very frustrated with the amount of folks that would like their ashes scattered at their park, but it's private property and you can't do that. And people try to be sneaky about it. And apparently that's one of the reasons there's so many cameras at the park, is that especially on dark rides like It's a Small World or the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, people try to slyly dump ashes off the sides of the road into the water. But every time that happens, they have to drain all the water, they have to clean the entire ride and then refill it. Wow. So even if you think you're being pretty sneaky, I mean, just be kind and be considerate. That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah. And there's lots of cool water soluble urns and bags out there. So, you know, the Puget Sound is totally fine, but something like Green Lake is not okay to the state. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some beautiful ones. As a gift, actually, for a friend of mine, I bought her a Himalayan salt urn. It doesn't look like an urn. It just looks like a nice like vase that you might put on your table side. And then if she decides she wants to be cremated, I've already covered that base for her. But that's something that's completely water soluble. And so it's kind of neat.
What a thoughtful gift.
She really enjoyed it. It seemed a little spooky at the time, but she really liked it.
All right. Shall we move on to the next one?
Sure.
Okay. So the next statement is a body can be buried or composted on personal property. For this one, we had 3 folks say fact and 10 say fiction. What do you have to say, Beverly?
I'm going to say
fact. So this one, we maybe tricked you a little bit with this one. So tell us how, Beverly.
Man. Okay, see, I had a hard time deciding because this one has a lot of fine print attached to it.
I see Andrea say not in Washington.
Okay, good. We've got some very diligent folks in the session today. So this one has some fine print to it. You can be buried on your personal property, but the state of Washington requires you to zone your land as a cemetery, which turns out is a surprisingly onerous process. There's other states where it's your private property, do what you want. But in Washington, yeah, Andrea's right. It can be really pricey, and it can cost, we've had folks contact us to ask us, I have this beautiful piece of land up in northern Washington and I want to spend the rest of my life here. And turns out that it can cost you upwards of $25,000 to zone your private property as a cemetery to conduct this. So it's really a matter of personal choice how you want to proceed with that.
And why?
And as far as, oh yeah, go ahead.
Why are they requesting that fee, the state?
I don't totally know. I think maybe it's, I don't know, when I kind of think about Washington state law, especially in terms of the way that we do land management here, I wonder if it's almost a way of trying to control the amount of folks that are doing it. If they make it really costly and the process kind of lengthy, it kind of helps control the amount of people that are doing it. But that's my best guess.
Yeah, looks like Andrea's agreeing, and
yeah.
I think that it's,
for some context, Andrea is one of our board members and a death doula, and she does lots of green burial all over the state. So she's pretty involved in some of the conservation cemeteries and green burial work happening. She's not just a random person.
And the money is to be used to steward and care for the property in perpetuity, because it's now become a cemetery space. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
With the composting thing, this one is a little sticky. Oh, I didn't mean that in like a literal sense. That's awful. Okay, so this is something else we get requests about. So people are really interested in natural organic reduction, for example, and they think, gosh, that's wonderful, but I live in Northeast Washington, middle of nowhere, or I really can't afford $5,000 or $5,500 for this process. Can I just do it on my own land? So that part is a little tricky, because in order to do this process, it's not like we would normally do our compost for our kitchen scraps. This is a really carefully controlled process that happens in an enclosed system, and there are certain temperatures that need to be remaining consistent in order to kill off any pathogens that might be remaining in the body and help break down everything into a more consistent, like more homogeneous size and texture. So it's not just like, we've had folks that kind of assume the process is like you would do with your kitchen scraps, and you certainly can't do that. It would be really gross and probably really traumatic for you to do on your own. We would strongly recommend that you contact one of the licensed natural organic reduction facilities in Washington for some guidance on how to proceed with this, because maybe there's an option that might meet your needs. Maybe you can't get the transportation down into Western Washington to visit one of those facilities. Maybe there's a way to create a soil amendment out of your ashes. Maybe there's some guidance on that. Or maybe, you are able to go through that process of natural organic reduction, and you're able to take the soil that remains at the end and then use that to maintain your property. So that could be a really beautiful way to help maintain your land in perpetuity without having to go through that onerous process of going through all the zoning laws and registering your land and spending all that money. So there's a lot of laws on this. Of course, they want to make sure that remains aren't being desecrated and land and nature is being respected. So do a little research on this one, and it's probably going to be specific to your county, possibly even your town. It's worth knowing ahead of time. Don't leave your family surprises. I think that that's maybe going to be like a theme in today's presentation, is that we have these conversations with the people we love, and sometimes we give them instructions that they really can't follow, and we need to be thoughtful. It's not fair.
Yeah. There was a family that we supported. It was the decedent's wish to be buried on their property, and the family moved forward doing that, yet they didn't designate the land as cemetery space. And so at the same time, I think a month or so later, that the family needed the death certificate in order to close the estate. So they reached out to a funeral home for that, and the funeral home was not able to grant to legally provide them with the death certificate, because the body had been buried on private property without permission. And so unfortunately, months later, the body did have to be exhumed. And so I don't think that was the decedent's intention. I just, they maybe thought that they could do it because it was their private property. So we have been, we've encountered this situation ourselves, and yeah, that was unfortunate.
Oh, I'm still talking to my therapist about that one.
Yeah.
So be mindful. Be mindful of the instructions you give your family.
Yeah.
Tough one.
All right, let's move on to the next statement.
I'm ready.
Okay, so if conventional burial, and by conventional burial we mean including a vault and a sealed casket, is not chosen, wild animals will scavenge the remains.
Okay, what's the team say?
One person says fact, and 12 people say fiction.
I feel pretty good about this one. I'm gonna go ahead and say fiction.
Yeah, that's right. So this is a green burial plot, I'm going to assume here. I just pulled this photo off the internet, but I do know that a green burial plot only goes down about 3 feet. And so there might be some questions about that. Yeah.
So last week during Brian Flowers' presentation about green burial, he talked about, I wrote this down in a sticky note because I loved the way that he explained it. He talked about a smell barrier. So humor me if this is if this is putting you off your morning coffee. But so there's about an 18-inch depth from the surface of a smell barrier. And so anything beyond that depth, any lower, is going to exceed the ability of most wildlife to smell it. So it would just be an exceptional amount of work for them to get down that deep to do any scavenging. And like Amanda mentioned, most of these green burials are happening at about a depth of about 3 feet, which you'll notice is quite a bit more shallow than a traditional grave, which is about 6 feet. And the reasoning behind that is that, the reason that a lot of folks are choosing green burial is that they want their body to break down and be reintegrated into the soil. If you bury someone down at 6 feet, the ground is quite a bit cooler. The soil composition is pretty different as you get deeper and deeper. And so it actually is a lot harder for the body to break down that far from the surface because we don't have the necessary oxygen and microbes. We don't have the same soil nutrients, and we don't have the right temperature to help nurture that decomposition process that allows us to be reintegrated into the soil. So if we go too deep, we're going to preserve the body more than we mean to. And if we go too shallow, certainly we don't want any unfortunate surprises for folks that might be coming across our grave. So we are kind of hovering at around 3 feet for a green burial. And it's only, like I said, an 18-inch sort of barrier there where animals can detect human remains. And so Brian Flowers shared with us last week that as far as ever has been reported during, I guess, in America, at least, that there aren't any reported instances of remains being scavenged by any wildlife in a green burial context. So.
Okay, so why then, without any judgment here, why might a funeral home try to sell a person a vault or a sealed casket, for example?
I think a couple reasons, and I'll try to not be too cynical about how much money there is to be made by insisting on these products. I think that we have a lot of emotion that's built into the way that we think about death, and especially in America, we are an unusually, I don't know, we have just this very puritanical relationship to death. We're so uncomfortable, and it's so taboo still in America. That the idea of decomposition is really troubling to most folks, and that's perfectly fine. So the idea that our loved one is sealed in a casket and protected by a vault really gives us this sense of peace that our loved one is protected. For a lot of folks, as much as we love the idea of returning to nature, it kind of feels like an insult to a loved one to not protect them. And a lot of people think about the way that they conduct a funeral as like a gift and an honor to their loved one, and they don't want to be seen as neglecting them in any way. And it's not a form of neglect to, allow the person to nurture the soil and return to the earth. But I think it's just this residual American idea about the way that we have to protect people into perpetuity. And there's also some really interesting religious backgrounds to it. Like there's some Judeo-Christian ethic about, well, not, I guess perhaps not Jewish, but some Christian denominations that believe that by preserving the body entirely, when the second coming of Christ happens, that the body will rise from the grave. And so you want to preserve it as much as possible because that person will be reanimated in the resurrection. And so there's actually like some logic behind it. So if you let the body break down or you cremate somebody, they won't have a body to rejoin the Lord in the afterlife. So there's, you know, a lot of deep-seated cultural and religious reasons that people do choose these options. And so the idea that they would forego them just feels like such a dishonor and such a disrespect. And that's everybody's individual decision, certainly.
Absolutely. And then also a practical piece for the cemetery is the vault helps keep that ground from caving in as the casket and the body decompose. So it allows for them to care for the lawn and make sure everyone can walk safely on their property as well.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's totally a practical reason for the vault. Yeah, you need a safe way to drive a lawnmower.
Yeah,
it's pretty simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. So this picture here is a mushroom suit. So the statement here is a human corpse can be colonized by and digested by mushrooms. So this one we were a little more even Steven than the others.
Yeah.
8 people said fact and 5 people said fiction.
This one I have a lot of strong feelings about because I feel like I've been had. So I'm gonna go ahead and say fiction. I feel lied to.
We were pretty disappointed by this one. This is such a cool concept.
Yeah.
If you want to give us just a quick summary of what this is.
Yeah, so there's, perhaps you saw this TED Talk by Jae-Rim Lee. I want to say the name of her company is Koiyo. And so there's an image right here on the screen of the mushroom suit that she patented. And she gave this really beautiful talk about it. And, you know, we've actually, even in the co-op, purchased a couple of these suits, and so I've seen them in person and they're gorgeous. They're a little on the pricey side, but it's something that families feel really strongly about. Again, trying to find a way to break their body down in an ecologically mindful way and return their loved one to the soil. It comes from a great place. I was so excited about this option. Like, what a cool idea. After some digging though, again, oh my gosh, I can't even stop with all these accidental death puns. I'm so sorry, you guys.
I didn't even catch that one.
It's such an accident, I promise. With this, I was really kind of bummed out when I started doing a little bit more digging about the way that the research process was conducted by Lee. And so it turns out that she conducted her design and experimentation process out of her own home, and certainly tons of scientific developments have occurred in people's homes, or even you know, like Archimedes discovering displacement. You know, he was in the bathtub and he jumped out, and you know, so there's a long history of scientific innovation happening at home. But she didn't follow up with any controlled environment to test the efficacy of the suit. And so in her home laboratory, she took her own hair, she took some of her skin, she took her nail clippings, and she used certain types of mushrooms. I believe it's predominantly shiitake and oyster, both very delicious, and was able to sort of tinker with those mushrooms to break down that tissue that she was containing in a petri dish. And so she did this over some time, and it went pretty well after some tinkering. And so she was like, cool, let's do it on a person. But it turns out that rather than moving like standard for any type of funeral technology or death care products, usually, you know, you're working on a small tissue sample, you expand to test on animals, and then, you know, you test on larger animals, and then hopefully you find some folks that really believe in the work you're doing and they're willing to contribute their own remains to your research, and then you can test on people. She skipped all those steps, which I get. You know, you get busy being a scientist and an entrepreneur. So she only ever tested on those small types of tissue, all part of the integumentary system. And that's not a good representation for the composition of the human body. Hair and nails, they're mostly made up of keratin and collagen. And those types of connective tissue break down quite a bit easier than other parts of the human body, like bones. So those mushrooms don't have the type of enzyme necessary to break down human bones. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but the right testing just wasn't conducted. And so though it might be a really great tool to break down some of those soft tissues, it's really ineffective. Let me see if I can remember what the name of that enzyme was. Somebody did this like really expansive study, actually a couple of studies in some peer-reviewed journals that I looked at, where they had cataloged hundreds and hundreds of different types of mushrooms to see if the necessary enzyme to break down calcium and break down the general composition of human bones, aside from the calcium, existed in any mushroom species. And they cataloged hundreds of types and didn't find this enzyme in any of them. And so these studies were, actually occurring even before the development of the mushroom suit. And so it kind of seems like maybe she didn't do as much of a literature review going into it. I don't believe that she was actually a mycologist to begin with, so she's not a specialist of fungi. So it's a wonderful idea, but the research really wasn't done as fully as it should have been. And there's not really any evidence to suggest that it is working the way that it's being marketed. And there's not really a way to check her work, because who's going to go and dig a decedent back up to check and see how well this is working? Which is why it's so important that any type of product like this goes through really rigorous testing, is because you want to make sure the thing that you're selling people really does what you're saying it does. Because this is a beautiful idea with so much potential, but ultimately people are paying, I want to say the wholesale cost for this suit is about $1,000, to say nothing of the way it might be marked up if you purchase it through a funeral home. And it's not doing the thing you're being told. It's pretty unethical.
Yeah. Yeah. We do have a question. Do you know if the point of the mushroom suit was to destroy toxins in the body rather than to completely decompose the body?
That was certainly part of the vision as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that was part of the vision, is that it would completely break the body down, including any toxins that might be remaining in the body, so that the entire body could be integrated into the soil in a healthy and ecologically sound way.
Okay. Yeah, we were bummed about this one.
I know, it's got so much potential.
I think what we'll do is we will share some of those studies that were done and put those in a follow-up email. Yeah. Yeah,
if you guys want to geek out with me, trust me, I could talk about this all day, and I'm sure Amanda's getting impatient with me.
No, not at all.
I'll absolutely.
I'm not a scientist. Goes over my head. That's okay. All right, let's move on because we've got a couple more questions to get to.
Okay.
All right, let me advance the slide here. Okay. So green burial has been in existence for millennia and is no funeral fad. Fact or fiction?
I feel very enthusiastic about this one.
Did
everyone else get it right?
Yeah. We got 12 folks saying fact, one person saying fiction, and that is a fact.
Yes. All right, cheer up, guys. No, it's been around for so long. You guys are doing good. You're doing good with these. Yeah. No, it's not a fad. This has been around for all of human existence. I mean, every culture kind of has their own prevailing ways of managing their dead, but embalming as we know it now, and the way that we talk about conventional funerals in America, that's only been around since the Civil War, which is sometimes shockingly recent to think about. One of those cool cards in the picture. Oh, you guys have such good questions. So yeah, the sort of creation of embalming happened during the Civil War. I can't remember the name of the doctor that did it, but I'll look that up too, because he had an incredibly just well manicured mustache that you just have to see. It's a true piece of art. It was developed because during the Civil War, people wanted to be reconnected to lost loved ones. People were traveling further than they ever had due to all kinds of new technology and the needs of warfare, certainly. You know, people were just going so much further than they ever had. And so the traditional ways of, you know, recapturing a body and caring for it at home became impractical. And as, you know, any of us that has ever lost somebody knows, there's such a value for so many of us to have the opportunity to physically say goodbye to somebody. It's not enough to just get a letter to say, oh yeah, they died, we buried them down in Virginia. That's not enough. So people really wanted that chance to bring the person home and, you know, bury them in their family cemetery and have everyone come to visit. And so the only way to really do that would have been to, you know, preserve the body and ship them home. And so there's this technology that's developed out of necessity to chemically preserve the body. And certainly the process has changed quite a bit since 1865 or 1861, whenever it was that they officially started doing this. But yeah, green burial's always been around. You know, First Nations folks over the last couple of millennia certainly weren't, certainly didn't have access to these types of technologies, or certainly weren't incorporating them into their cultural practices. And you know, you can see all kinds of historical cemeteries all through Europe, ossuaries and things like that, where people would be buried for a certain amount of time, and once the body had decomposed pretty sufficiently, they'd be dug back up and their bones would be used to create art. Graves in a lot of parts of Europe aren't a permanent home for a decedent. So there's all kinds of traditions all over the world for ways to encourage the decomposition of a body, to nurture the earth, or to, you know, just use that land in a temporary sense. So this isn't a fad, but we are in this really cool time right now where there's so many different scientists and entrepreneurs that are trying to find ways for us to kind of move back towards that. You know, there's nothing wrong with, you know, embalming and doing the full shebang with a beautiful casket and a vault and a cemetery with a monument. That has its place, but it's not for everybody. So we want to make sure we have a diversity of options out there for families to, you know, get their needs met. And for a lot of families, kind of paring it down and keeping things simple and reducing the cost and finding a way to reduce our impact on the earth in death is a priority. So we're in a cool time where there's a lot more options than there've ever been, but trust me, this is not a fad. It's always been the case.
Yeah, and we wanted to bring this one up because we're noticing more cemeteries and funeral homes are offering green burial, of course, because there's a demand for it. And so we just wanted to address it, that it's not a fad. It's not cemeteries and funeral homes trying to push to sell something different. You know, and what you see here on this beautiful cart, I wish I knew where to get one. Bill, I think you asked that question, but I'm not sure. But you'll see the body here has been wrapped in a shroud, which is a fabric. So there are, any fabric can be used as long as it's non-toxic. Cotton, linen, different types of fabrics can be used. There are also several green burial or eco-friendly caskets that are available, made out of wicker or pine. Just the key here is you don't want to have any metal parts, or you don't want to use an endangered species wood. So something like pine is fine. So good news on this one.
With the cart, actually, we learned last week from Brian Flowers that some families actually build their own. He shared an example of a family that he served up north, and they had built a really cool kind of cart. It didn't look quite like this. It had more of a hammock design, which was really neat. So there's all kinds of people online that are really passionate about this subject and are creating tutorials for how to build your own casket or how to build your own cart to do these types of things to meet the needs of families. And it's such a cool way to engage with providing funeral care from home for your loved one. Like, what a beautiful project to be able to build something like that for someone you love. If you're pretty handy, that could be something that's a project that would be really meaningful to you.
Absolutely. Great. We've got some good comments going on in the chat. So pull those up, folks, if you want to read them. I'm going to take us to the next statement. We've got two more left. The time is running away from us. This is a fun one.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm trying to not steal all of our time, but wow, there's just so much to say.
This is good. Again, we will save the comments in the chat. And so if there's anything in there that we don't have time to address, we'll make sure to get to it in the follow-up email. All right, our next statement. The toxins from a corpse will not leach into the soil. Again, a mixed bag here on this one. We had 6 folks say fact, 7 say fiction. Beverly, what do you think?
I was hoping to cheat off your guys' answers. These are getting tougher. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and say fact. Am I right?
Fact, yeah.
Okay, this is stressful. Okay, so this one is another one of those nuanced kind of trick questions. I think it's a two-pronged answer. The first thing is that we've been sort of primed by social media and the beauty industry to think of our bodies as full of toxins. but they're not, because if you have a liver and at least one functioning kidney, your body has an excellent filtration process already working. And if one of those organs isn't working, you're definitely working with a medical team to find some alternative options to make sure that your bodily fluids and your tissues are working correctly and doing that important filtration work. So I think it's important to note that the human body is not just, as a baseline, full of toxins. It's a beautifully well-honed system, usually, unless you're me and you have delicate avian bones. So I think it's important to know that as a baseline, we're not full of toxins. So shifting from that, I think it's maybe a lot of folks are thinking that they're concerned about maybe if a decedent had been undergoing chemotherapy or radiation therapy, or maybe, you know, they had a chronic illness and so they had taken a lot of medications for a long period of time, and maybe those medications were retained by the fatty tissues in their body. And that's a possibility. But as it turns out, those things break down over time. And again, our livers and our kidneys are really excellent filtration systems. And so they work really hard to kind of pull out the garbage and do a little science on it and release and excrete out of the, out in our urine predominantly. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where people are thinking about the toxins. And I think also it's important to note that, you know, one decedent is not going to release enough of those chemicals into the soil to ruin the environment. Which isn't to say that we shouldn't keep thinking about and being concerned about it. I think it's also important to remember that soil itself is a really excellent filtration system. And in a lot of parts of the world, soil is actually used to clean water. And so when those chemicals don't just sit in the earth, it's an ongoing chemical process interacting with that soil and with the water and with the environment. And so things evaporate and they're adsorbed and they're absorbed. And so it's a constant process. So things don't just sit there generally. But when we're looking at perhaps someone that's been embalmed, there are a number of chemicals that are placed into the body to fill void space and to preserve tissues. And those are not designed to be consumed by the environment around them. You know, over time, those liquids will evaporate, but there will be particulates that remain behind. And depending on which chemical we're thinking of, you know, maybe those things break down over time and decay, but a lot of them are designed to kind of get you a little bit of mileage out of preserving a decedent. And we don't want those in the soil. Kind of the major concern of those chemicals that are used to preserve bodies is formaldehyde, which is banned throughout the European Union because it's a known carcinogen. So even the people that are handling and caring for our loved ones, that exposure to embalming fluid over a lifetime can build up in their tissues and make them quite sick. So, you know, we know from research conducted in other countries and on other continents widely that these chemicals are very toxic to living people. And so that should be a good enough reason for us to re-examine the way that we are conducting these processes so they're more safe for our death care workers. And also maybe it's a good indication that maybe it's time we try something a little bit different in terms of preservation, because maybe there's some alternatives that are less toxic to the environment. Formaldehyde doesn't do any good work in our soil. It doesn't really nurture plant growth, doesn't really do anything good for our groundwater.
Yeah, it looks like Tom seconds that comment as well.
Thanks, Tom.
Great. Okay, we've got one more. We're 10 till the hour, so thank you for sticking around with us. So this one is really fun.
Let me limber up. Okay. Ooh, I love this one.
So our last statement is: a human skull or other part of the skeleton can be preserved as a keepsake. Now, this might make you squirm, but you'd be surprised to hear how many people want some sort of keepsake like this, or maybe the artificial hip or shoulder that was in their loved one. They want it after their loved one has gone. So let's see what people think. 5 people say this is fact, that we can preserve these.
Okay.
8 people say this is fiction.
Okay.
What do you think, Beverly? Let us know. Fiction, that's right. A bummer for some, but maybe not for all.
Well, I think it's a bummer because I get a lot of phone calls about this in the office because we all have our ways of dealing with loss, and maybe the way that you want that is to be able to have the skull of your grandpa on your mantelpiece. And in a way, it's a little spooky, it's a little gruesome, but also it's kind of beautiful. And, you know, who's to say what the right way to remember and feel guided by our loved ones is? Unfortunately, this is not an option in America. every state has their own laws about the way that you handle the decedent. They deliberately write the law to be kind of vague about the way that you handle remains, specifically about decedents, because they don't want to have to deal with desecration of remains. And so rather than defining that is left pretty open, because they're not going to make a list of all the horrible things you could do to a dead body to say, don't do any of these. So they do keep it a little bit vague, but by and large, the preservation of the bones of a decedent are considered to be desecration of a body, even if you're doing it for a good reason. But it's really disappointing because there's, we've seen such beautiful work done in taxidermy, which is a sentence I never thought I would say as a vegetarian. But there's some real artists out there that are doing all kinds of amazing work to preserve our loved ones. And, you see that a lot with some of the pet funeral homes offering beautiful artistic options to remember those loved ones. But unfortunately, we can't have the skull back. And as many times as I get asked about it, I remember I had a especially kind of funny conversation with someone at work about this over the phone, and was like, I'm sorry, you'd be very hard pressed to find a death care worker who would be willing to remove a head from a body to help you preserve it. And I was recounting that to my best friend, and I was thinking, gosh, what a weird job that I have, that I was on the phone with someone and they were trying to find someone to decapitate a loved one to preserve the skull. Like, what is this job? And she told me, that's what I want you to do with my body. What are you trying to say? And I thought she was just being cheeky, but we both went to school for literature and we're both big Shakespeare fans. And so she was saying, no, I would love it if my skull stayed in the family. And, I always really connected to Hamlet. And I think it's kind of funny and kind of a good way to remember me by to have my skull. So I had to let her know, I know that I'm the person that handles your estate and I'm the person that makes decisions about your funeral, but you can't ask me to do this because it's against the law. So this is one of those times where you need to be mindful of the way that you instruct your loved ones, because you might be pressuring them into doing something that isn't really doable. But she had a whole series of questions all outlined about ways we could work around this law. So she said, well, what if it's in my will that you can't get your share of my estate unless you do this specific thing? And I said, I can't break the law just because you told me to in writing. And so she said, well, what if, as a condition of my will, that my estate can't be dispersed unless my body is preserved and buried in a sealed casket, and then in 50 years, my body is dug up, and then the skull is cleaned and preserved. And so it turned into a weird sort of theoretical conversation about what the difference between grave robbing and archaeology is. And so, because, certainly we dig up the remains of all kinds of cultures around the world, and those things end up in museums. So it turned into a very strange conversation, but it's a surprisingly common one that I have with families. Luckily, we can reconnect you with hardware that might be in your loved one's body. We have been able to reunite people with body parts while they're still alive. We did help at the co-op recently. We gave someone their uterus back after they had a hysterectomy, which was a very cool thing we were able to do. We've had families where they've had a leg amputated or something like that, but that's a moment where a living person is able to ask for something back. And it's medical waste, and that's a discussion you have to have with your medical team about the way that you do that. And some places will require you to work with a funeral home to get reconnected back up with that tissue. But, that's an option. But if the person has died, it turns into a really sticky ethical area about the way that you treat and you respect the deceased. There's an Instagrammer who, after a really aggressive bone sarcoma, had to have an amputation done, and she was able to get that tissue back, work with a taxidermist on her amputated leg, and then have it cleaned and articulated and preserved. And she takes it all over the world, and it is on vacation in these real cheeky photos. And she uses it to educate people about cancer. So you're alive.
Yeah. See, and you never know. Someone can be using it to do something so valuable like that. So I'm not going to judge them. Not for me, but good for them.
Well, and that's the thing. It takes all kinds. And I think it's important that we remember that everybody's death care looks different. It needs to be individualized. It needs to meet your needs. No one can tell you the right way to memorialize and love someone. It's just important that we maybe are mindful of what kind of legal and practical limitations that there are on those practices.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. I think that was kind of our vision for this week, and I hope that came across was, PMA, we're not here to judge and say that any one form of disposition or handling of the body after death is right or wrong. Our whole mission is to provide education on all of the options. At the beginning, I said some of our advocacy work is about increasing choices, and that is so that we can all, we're so different in life. And so it only makes sense that we will have different choices in death. And so our mission is really just to provide you in formats like this with the information from a non-judgmental perspective so that you can make the best decision for yourself and your family. So thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. And we've got just a few more minutes. I'm going to ask you one more question from Melissa. Sure. So I've heard of, I know you have too, Beverly. There's a practice in Tibet where the body is placed on top of a mountain. I even saw in a previous comment, maybe even at the top of trees, and vultures can consume the body as a form of disposition. Have you heard of that? And do you know if it's something that's available to us in the States?
So this is it's another one of those things with a multi-pronged answer. So that is a practice. There are some Tibetan folks. There's also some Zoroastrian folks in Asia that practice this as well in a little bit of a different format. And so there are other countries where this is a pretty accessible option. Here in the US, as far as I'm aware, there's only one facility that does offer this, and they don't want death tourists. So they really only want you to be using their facility if you're a member of their community. And so there's people that are very strategic and they will move to this community and to, meet the requirements of living there and being integrated into the community. To be able to access this pyre where you're, up in the sky and being able to be consumed by birds. But, there's a lot of limitations placed on it. And so, yeah, it's a great example of you need advocacy work to protect those cultural practices, because in the US, we have a really problematic relationship with trying to govern the way so that diverse communities, especially among Indigenous First Nations folks, about the way that they conduct their day-to-day lives, including their death care. And so we want to make sure that those types of practices are preserved, because it sounds a little, I don't know, to me, that sounds kind of, being picked apart by birds sounds kind of gross, but for someone who's, thinking of their sacred relationship to wildlife and returning to the earth and being broken down and humbled in death, that's so important. So it's really limited access here in the US, this particular practice, but there's other parts of the world where it is. And so, it's fascinating reading if you have a strong stomach.
Yeah. Great.
You have anything else for me?
Okay, I think that's it. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. That is the end for us for Green Funerals Week, plus a few days. We have recorded all of our sessions except for the discussion that we had on Saturday with our volunteer Anne. So we've got most of them on the webinar library on our website under the education tab. I think there's today's and the natural organic presentation I've got to get up there. So we'll get that up there today or tomorrow. And we will be sharing some follow-up emails with some of the resources that have been brought up. So we are just so grateful that you helped us make this vision come to life. And I think that we're going to do it again. Don't you think, Beverly?
I really want to, and I've had so many folks reach out to me over the last week to say, let's do this more. Even some of our presenters were really energized by your participation and your questions and your passion. We've really enjoyed this opportunity. We know that you have so many questions, and everybody's time is so limited, and this really was born out of the fact that I have so many of these kind of quirky conversations with members on the phone, and I never have enough time to really dig into them, and we want to honor them because we know this stuff's important to you and it's important to us. So if you still have questions, please contact us anytime. And we'll do our best to help you get connected to the resources that'll get you those answers. And I know there's a whole bunch of questions in the chat that we weren't able to get to today, and I'll make sure we get some answers out to that. We really are just so glad you've all been here to work through these questions, because we know they're big. Sometimes they're tough to talk about, and sometimes they're a little bit gross.
Well, and I hope you know that PMA is a safe space for you to submit any question, no matter how strange or gross you think it is. We will research it and provide you with a factual answer. So with that,
there's no such thing as a stupid question, and we've always heard something weirder.
Yes. All right, so we'll call that a day. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.